Hi, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of Indian Express UpGrad Talks. We are delighted to have each one of you here, and thank you very much for taking out time from your busy schedule to come attend this talk. I hope this talk is an insightful use of your time on this busy Saturday evening. Very quickly, I just wanted to spend some time to talk about why we are doing this talk, what's the context, what's the objective. My name is Mayank Kumar. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of upGrad. At upGrad, our vision and mission has always been to build careers of tomorrow, and therefore the focus has always been providing the right kind of skills training in this country to the youth of the country as well as the working professionals, and help them move up in the career. That was the context at which we started off, and we realized that over a period of time, a lot has changed in the ecosystem. I think I was telling someone outside, my father was in one job for his entire career. I have shifted jobs 3-4 times, and I can see that happening even at a much more accelerated pace going forward, where people would be moving from one job to another. And education cannot no longer be an event in someone's life that at the end of 23, I'm completed with my education, what next? And it's an ongoing process. Safe jobs are now becoming more unconventional thing. People are always looking to move up, upskill, and stay relevant in the context of what's going on in today's industry. If you look at from what was 20 years back to what it is today, perhaps even when I graduated about 10, 15 years back, I did not know a job like social media manager would exist today, or what a data scientist would do. But all those things keep on evolving, and therefore it is imperative for each one of us, and especially the working professionals in the country, to stay on top of the key changes happening in the industry. So the context of this particular talk is to bring on all these elements together and sort of keep learning at the forefront so that we can we understand and realize the value of learning in the current context of the rapid changes happening. That's broadly the context, and this is the first edition of the talk that we are starting with. And as we go along, we will come out with different editions in different cities in India, ensuring that the working professional is in touch with the realities that's happening in the market. Now, with that, I will let Pavita take the stage and give a brief introduction of the panelists coming on stage. We have a powerful panelist coming and talking about this particular topic. We will hear their thoughts, and you guys will have options to ask questions at the end. With that, I'll just hand over the stage to Pavita.
Thank you, Mayank. Good evening. A very warm welcome again to the Indian Express upGrad Talks. For those of you familiar with the Indian Express, it is a space for ideas and opinions that help shape the world that we live in. For that, we feel it's important for us to have a deeper understanding and insight into the challenges that we face. What we try and do every day through our stories in the newspaper, online, is to sort of try and get you the macroeconomic, political, socio trends that sort of help make better sense of what's happening in the world around us. The Express upGrad Talks is sort of brings the same spirit of explanation to some of our more personal spaces. These talks will hopefully focus as we go along on ideas through which we can continue to stay relevant in our careers and try and optimize our personal efficiencies. What we have for you today is a panel which is fantastic. These are leaders who will share with you their personal experiences and the motivations that drive them. Please welcome Mr. Rishad Premji, Chief Strategy Officer, Wipro, and Mr. Manish Sabharwal, Chairman, Team Leads. They will be in conversation with Mr. Ronnie Screwvala, co-founder upGrad, and Shaji Vikraman, National Policy Editor, The Indian Express. We invite you to listen in and also jot down your questions. We hope we can take some of them, and which can be addressed to the panel later. We hope you enjoy this session and get inspired from it as much as we will get inspired by you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. We're going to try and make this as interactive as possible. So here we're just going to start off our chat. We've got a fair amount of your questions in, and we'll take that also as we kind of go across. So turning both to Rishad and Manish first, I just want to sort of summarize the goals for why we're here and what some of the young professionals, young students today, and what's uppermost in their mind, is change and the whole element of what is it that we need to do. We're in this place where should we be satisfied and calm with our career options and moves? Or is whatever we're reading in the media and whatever is the speculative part, how over-dramatized is that? Is there a sense of urgency? Today in my career growth, what do I need to do? Do I need to be panicky? Do I need to sort of look at this with a slightly different perspective? Am I going on in the right path? And I think today the threat of what everyone calls the new technologies, the robotics or whatever else, seems to be putting almost all sense of employment at stake. But most important, it's questioning people as to what they need to do in terms of their learning. So I think today's discussion is more about the sense of the impact, the urgency. Is there real change? And I think we're going to have some very diverse points of view as far as that's concerned. So maybe start with you, Rishad, on just your overall views, I think, just on learning the element of change, how dramatic is that? What if I'm a young professional, what should I be worrying about and what should I be thinking about?
Look, I'd say a couple of things. One is clearly, given how disruptive technology has become, the life cycle or the lifespan of skills has shrunk dramatically, right? And so the challenge and the opportunity today is not so much around content or the learning of the specific skill, the actual capability that you have, but the learnability of new skills. And how do you actually keep your mind open and keep options open to continuously learning new skills? So one is the piece of content, the actual work. The other is the ability to sort of, how do you work and sort of build capabilities around critical analysis, around thinking, around the ability to work with teams, around the ability to work much, much more closely with different stakeholders as opposed to purely around capability. So that's one big point. Learnability of not only technical skills, but moving into critical thinking, into analytical thinking, et cetera, becomes very, very important. From company perspectives, I think what's changing dramatically is the availability of some of these skills is shrinking or non-existent. And so organizations can't go out to find some of these skills, they actually have to build them internally. And the third thing is that employees today are demanding a significant expectation from their companies of how they can participate in this experience of learning inside the organizations. And so organizations are having to think very, very disruptively about building new skills. And so I'll just share an example of what we as a company are doing. And let me just add one more point to that. The fundamental change in the way I think skilling and learning is happening is that historically large organizations used to push skills onto people, right? They would have very, very formal programs at the beginning of the year. You'd spend 3 months at the beginning sort of training people. More and more that skilling is moving to a pull-based model. So people are actually demanding those skills and they have to go out and seek them. So one of the things we've set up as a company, for example, Wipro, where we've set up something called Top Gear, which is a virtual and physical space where people have an opportunity to sort of access 30, 40 different technology environments. They can come in there, they can get, access content, they can get assessed, they can get certified, and equally importantly, they can then participate through a crowdsourcing model on projects that are available inside the company. So they get real life experience as opposed to just paper-based experience, so to speak. But the model for that is you've got to go out there and access it and not have it come to you. And so people who don't participate in the opportunity, who don't recognize that if they don't keep themselves upbeat with the change, are going to get left behind.
I want to turn to Manish, but before that, just one tight question for you on that. Because you presented it much more from a corporate side, do you therefore feel that actually corporates are responsible for creating a sense of lethargy amongst employees and young professionals because they actually really feel maybe it's the company's job to upskill me or do whatever. I'm here, I'm available, I'm open, but really it's the corporate's responsibility. And I think at some stage there's going to be a shock value or a surprise value because you might be looking at it as a smaller pyramid and everyone there might be thinking of it as their birthright. So.
But I think that's changed very dramatically, Ronnie. I think historically, maybe even 5 years ago, corporations perhaps thought it was their responsibility. Corporations don't necessarily think that it is their responsibility to get people trained. Corporations certainly think it's their responsibility to provide the platform for people to upskill and reskill. But those who don't want to get onto the bus will just get left behind because there are enough people who want to be on that bus and need the help to be on that bus.
Okay, so we're going to circle back on that because I think that bus is very important for everyone here. a contrarian view,
Well,
as always.
no, I think this is, employment has shifted from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship because organizations aren't permanent and perpetual, right? The average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company when the first list came out in 1955 was 64 years. In the last list, which came out a month ago, it's 15 years. So if companies only last 14 or 15 years, then the notion that benefits will be linked to the employer, learnability will be linked to the employer is maybe a sort of assumption you have to challenge. And frankly, that notion of lifetime employment or organization man was only a sort of 50, 60-year time frame in the broad sweep of history. So you have to be careful with sort of believing that this is how the world worked. The second one, which we sort of talked about before we came onto the stage, which I'm sort of starting to get more humble about, is that the future is unknowable. And there's Richard Armitage is a professor at Harvard. He warns of the disease of presentism. You know, today's circumstances are so unique and so sort of different from the past that we have to, you know, we don't know where to go. I mean, my submission is that I think the world is changing. The world has always been changing. I mean, there are lots of people who will say that the discovery of the internet or stuff is nothing compared to Robert Gordon, you know, that it's nothing compared to the discovery of the flush toilet and electricity, right? So I think the world has been making progress. I think the world is changing. I think that has implications for how we educate people, what we define as valuable skills. Finally, you have to look at the wage premium, right? For a long time in the world, there was a college wage premium. That got replaced by the skill wage premium. But actually, the things that Rishad described are the school wage premium. Right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic have been the 3 R's, which is really what we're saying. You may add a 4th R of relationships today. So soft skills is probably where you see the most important wage premium. But soft skills are best taught in the 12 years of school because it's very hard to sort of put lipstick on a pig at the end of school. I mean, if you haven't learned how to get soft skills in your 12 years, it's very hard to teach people in 3 months what they should have learned in 12 years, or in 6 months what they should have learned in 15 years. So I would say that, you know, this time of massive change in both education, employment, and employability is a massive opportunity for people who want to learn, who are lifelong learners, who are, you know, more than being competent, you have to be open. But I don't see that as a threat.
Rishad, from a point of view, what you mentioned about skilling, what would you, for an audience like this, actually, a lot of young people out there, what is it that you would look for actually when you're saying in terms of adaptability, in terms of learning from a company standpoint view and from a personal point of view, what is it that you would look out actually, looking at some of these challenges which both of you mentioned?
No, I think it's an ability to constantly upgrade, right? And a focus on constantly upgrading. And the beauty of the system today is that the opportunity there is so much higher than it was 5 or 6 years ago, right? Because everything was largely classroom-based, everything was sort of getting people together physically. Everything has moved to being on demand, right? People can demand training anytime, anywhere, at their pace. It can be highly contextual to their role, to their stage of career, to their development path. It can be on demand, it's on mobile, it can be in smaller bites, which is more absorbable. So how do people leverage that, absorb that, use that? For us is very, very important. The other, and you know, is how do you combine the technical skills with what I'm calling behavioral skills, some of which, you know, Manish touched upon as well. But, you know, how do you get
skills, the soft
skills, right? Also, you know, and we sort of actually focus a lot on that, you know, the ability to communicate and not be an individual contributor. So to be able to communicate, to be able to work in teams, right? To be able to collaborate. Those things are becoming more and more important than the traditional individual contributor sort of structure that existed in many technical organizations of people coming out of college very, very young. So those two things I would say are important. Willingness to sort of participate and learn, and there's so much opportunity to participate and learn it, so it's so much easier, and these behavioral skills.
If I could just ask a follow-up question to that, which is Wipro anyway is actually involved in the university which you have. I don't know about many other corporates who are doing it, and we had a series which we ran on engineering colleges, which we discussed earlier, which is over 50% of the seats are empty actually, what we're seeing. So when you look at that, is there much more that Indian corporates, Indian companies need to do on this skilling, these challenges? And is it that probably the way you look at it from the Wipro standpoint of view on this in terms of skilling and challenges?
No, so there's two different things, Shaji, I would submit. One is there's a clear mismatch between supply and demand, right? The number of students that graduate from engineering schools are significantly higher today than the number of people that are being employed, the number of people companies, at least large companies, are looking to employ. So there's a mismatch in terms of much lower demand compared to supply. The other is how do you significantly help upskill people who are graduating from college so that they can be much more employable. So, many years ago, the industry got together and ran something called Mission 10X, where how could you work with 10,000 teachers to make them better teachers to be able to graduate better students. Very specifically to our company, because this is what I know, we work with 20 universities to actually work with the professors to get them, to train them, to get them to do a better job in a particular class during a course. And so people who graduate from those universities will spend 1 week after joining Wipro in training versus the traditional 6 weeks with somebody who didn't come from that university, as an example. The others, we do something called for a pre-joining group, so people who've been accepted into the company, if they can do an online course, and we have a couple of partners, again, if they get certified and assessed, then they accelerate on the actual training. So there's one major supply-demand mismatch, which frankly benefits companies, but two, how do you make the people who are actually coming out much, much more employable? And we as a company and as an industry, many, many participants are very much focused on driving that, increasing employability.
But let me add to that, because college isn't what it used to be. The world has produced more graduates in the last 35 years than the 800 years before that when Oxford or Cambridge were invented. So what does that mean? It means 60% of taxi drivers in Korea now have a college degree. 31% of retail sales clerks in the US have a college degree. 15% of high-end security guards in India have a college degree now. So college isn't what it is, but college matters. The social signaling value of college has become an important component of how do you get married, or just lazy employers using college sort of, and we shouldn't patronize people. Vocational training is usually for other people's children. It's not for our children, Michael. Rishad went to Harvard. Harvard's a good place to be at, but it's a better place to be from, right? The fundamental value is being from Harvard, not being at Harvard, as he will realize 20 years from now. And so I think we have to recognize that this tradition, we can't have this partition in as India's, education ayatollahs have between the world of degrees and the world of training. UGC has sort of always sort of kept those worlds separately. So education has to move to having a 3-month certificate as an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, for a 2-year associate degree and a 3-year degree. And it should be multimodal. You could get academic credit for an apprenticeship, you could do it online, you could do it in a classroom. That sort of fluidity in the education system doesn't exist because of regulatory cholesterol. So I think the world of work is moving much faster than also the world of education, because we have to sort of respond also.
Yeah, I think 2 words that I want to hold on to when you all started off. One was you used the word lifelong, and you used the word bus. And I'm just trying to sort of simplify it and dumb it down a little bit, because I think it's relevant for but just an observation here, and also a question, is that I think what we're moving to in terms of skill sets, is that going to represent 100% of change, or is that really going to represent the 20% of the change? And for the other 80%, is the base that everyone thinks, okay, if I don't want to upskill myself to being in artificial intelligence or big data or robotics or whatever else, the key issue that goes on with a lot of young people today is that even at the base I'm in, if I don't choose to do that, I still need to move my base camp up in any case, which means learning has to go to the next level. And that's a big question in a lot of people's mind, that otherwise it just sounds like status quo, or I'm going to get replaced. But everyone's not going to get replaced, so I'm still going to be fine. And I think that quantum part needs to be sort of described or sort of evaluated by people. Just your views on that?
Actually, Ronnie, I really struggle with that question, because I can't think of any job where at some level you're not fundamentally reskilling or upskilling yourself as you're moving up a career ladder.
But
right?
in your company, between 1995 and 2010, did you find the need for that, or is it much more compelling now?
No, people were, in fact, one of the things I would argue is that as people move from being in technical jobs or individual contributor jobs into project management and program management jobs, they actually forgot some of their technical capabilities, and they became team managers or delivery issue managers. And that became some of the challenges, that they forgot what it was to code or what it was in terms of what they had from a technical capability. And then 15 years later, it's a little bit difficult to then try and play catch up. So my submission would be, you know, irrespective whether you're talking about new age skill jobs or just moving in any technical sort of path of growth, you've got to be continuously upgrading and upskilling yourself to stay relevant.
And therefore the question of if you're not getting on the bus, what happens? I mean, I think just in sense of the urgency and immediacy of that, where do you see, what's the option for people who are not getting on the bus? Because not everyone's going to get on the bus.
No, I think, look, I think there are three sets of people. You know, there's one set of people who are digitally native, who just get it, who are leading the ride, so to speak. There's a second bunch of people who really they recognize the need for this, they want to get onto that bus, so to speak. And it's the responsibility of the system, of organizations to help them. So for example, you know, I represent Wipro on NASSCOM, which is the industry body that represents the $150 billion IT industry. A big, big focus in many of our board meetings is driving huge upskill initiatives, working with the government on scale to help people move up, right? So this is for people who want to be on that bus, so to speak, if we're staying with that metaphor, to get onto that. But there'll be a set of people that just say, look, this is all hype and overstated, and you know what I've been doing for the last 20 years will help me move forward or help me stay where I am. And I think that may be a bit
so that would be complacency, but if I was, again, at that young professional, that I needed to see an ROI movement, and I'm not guaranteed the outcome of what I want to do. So I'm getting on a bus, I have to invest, I have to spend time, or I have to invest physically, time, opportunity, money, whatever else. What's my gratification and guarantee that I'm not going to be outnumbered when it goes to the top of the pyramid? And I think that's the concern with a lot of people.
No, and there is no guarantee. I don't, you know, but I certainly think that the chances
What's
of
the advice then?
No, the advice certainly is that you must be taking that up. You must certainly be looking at opportunities to upskill yourself, to participate in new opportunities for learning, you know, and organizations, the ecosystem generally provides those opportunities. And I think if you're not participating in them, you're certainly diminishing opportunities for growth. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be off the bus. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't grow, but you're certainly diminishing those opportunities for growth, I think.
And this you would say across sectors. You're not necessarily talking because we're in Bangalore and therefore we're looking at the services sector and the IT sector, but you're saying across sectors.
I mean, you know, Manish would have a much stronger view on this, but my perspective is anybody who's generally not upskilling themselves continuously is going to get left behind, right?
So just simplify for everyone here your definition of lifelong learning. And is that something you would have advocated a decade back or 5 years back?
Absolutely. I mean, see, the notion that you can predict, and I know people feel technology is accelerating, but 50% of the jobs created in the US in every decade since the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000 didn't exist in the decade before that. So it's not clear you could actually predict that, oh, this is where the jobs will be in 1970s or 80s. In fact, we've studied at the National Skill Mission, 50 countries have done a report of jobs in 2030 in England, US in 2010. They have the efficacy of palm reading or astrology. You absolutely cannot predict the future. You have to be humble about that. But can you prepare for the future? Of course you can prepare for the future. There is a repair, prepare, and upgrade sort of continuum in my head. Repair is sort of last mile stuff. Prepare is obviously the fundamentals which you can't do quickly. But upgrade is a continuous sort of availability to you as whether to do MOOCs. Now, MOOCs have been a failure, right? Only 4% of people who sign up for MOOCs finish. But that's not true for people. And those people who finish are the ones who are doing upgrade. See, all of technology has been a big disappointment in education. I mean, we all know technology matters in education, we don't know how. But it's actually not a failure for upgrade. It's been a failure for prepare and repair at this point in time, because the motivation of the learner is you haven't been able to tackle that. So if you were to say that cost, quality, and quantity are the impossible trinity in education, right? You can raise cost and you kill quantity, you can raise quantity, but you kill quality. We thought that technology would be a solution. We may still be 1 or 2 iterations away from that. So I would say you have to think about repair, prepare, and upgrade as a continuum at an individual level, at an organizational level, and at a country level. And you have to really identify specific sort of interventions in all three. Every country, every company, and every individual needs all three.
And just in terms of sectors, because I think you deal with a wide spectrum of them, is there anything you call out that it's more urgent in a few sectors and not? Though I know the natural answer would be no, but...
I mean, see, the three industries which created team leads are on strike, right? Financial services, retail, and telecom. I mean, but FMCG, other things are taking off at this point in time. See, I'm the waiter in the restaurant, I'm not the chef. I don't really get to decide where jobs get created. I just figuring out how to, the heat map keeps sort of moving. But if you were to say in the next, not from the IT's perspective, though I'm willing to challenge some of the doom and gloom, IT employs 4 million people, I'm willing to bet that will be 7 million people 5 years from now, and I think hopefully Rishad will agree. So the notion that IT will be smaller than what it is sort of overblown. But if you were to take the fastest growing sector of the jobs in the Indian economy, they are sales and customer service. Now that's all kinds of sales. It's water filter sales, it's telecom sales, it's FMCG sales. We have 10,000 people selling seeds. We have 10,000, 20, 15,000 people selling mobile phones. And I'm in a different universe, right? I am at the bottom of the pyramid. But I would submit to say that even at the bottom of the pyramid, not sort of moving soft skills, not moving English. I mean, English is like Windows. It's an operating system, right? It's not a language. Your wage premium is 100% higher, at least in service jobs, if you can speak English well. And I know people get sensitive about English as sort of language and this thing, but English is a vocational skill. Soft skills are a vocational skill. So the definition of what is a vocational skill has shifted away from saying it's a specific plumber, carpenter. In a modern economy, China's farm to non-farm transition happened to factories. India's farm to non-farm transition is happening to sales, not even to services. So not for this audience, but in the world that I inhabit, right? We have hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 5 years, but we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So does India have a jobs problem, or does India have an unemployability problem? I think we have an unemployability problem, and everybody has to think about repair, prepare, and upgrade.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions to Rishad. One is that what Manish was talking about on IT sector, actually. I think he's not on the linear growth of the sector. So how do you see that growth of for the IT sector over the next few years? And you have worked with your acquisitions across regions all over. So what are the learnings from the acquisitions and people from all these regions, and also the fact that apart from the learning, what are the mistakes probably over the learning which you yourself had over the last few years?
Yeah.
On the mistakes,
so
if you could admit
I'll
as
take the second
a leader.
question first. Look, for us, many of the acquisitions have actually been a capability, a skill acquisition focus, right? And that's for the simple reason that we don't have them, and how can you significantly accelerate having those skills? And skill differentiation today is a huge advantage in winning, right? So while there's a lot of talk about the IT services industry and where it's going, I'm of a firm belief that in the next 12 to 18 months, just having skills in new age areas will matter. Skills in the data sciences space, skills in the cognitive space, in the cybersecurity space, et cetera, et cetera. The skills in itself is a big, big differentiator. Look, on the comment on sort of where is the industry growing and from an employability perspective, I'm directionally in the Manish camp, which is, I don't believe that, the industry is going to go from hiring 4 million people today to suddenly hiring 2.5 or 3 million people next 5 years. What I do believe, though, is that the speed of acceleration will slow down. And one of the reasons for that will be that, historically productivity was about how you can do things with less people. Productivity is now about how you can do things without people. Right? And that certainly will play a part. But there will be other opportunities and new skills that will present themselves, and so people will have to pivot. And that goes back to the point of, I see a very strong continuum between the skills of today and the skills of tomorrow, and sort of moving from the skills of today and upgrading eventually takes you to the skills of tomorrow. So I am on the Manish camp, though I don't think it may be as fast as it's been historically, and there's, it'll slow down a little bit, but that doesn't mean to say there won't be jobs.
In that learning process, actually, were there mistakes which you would now looking back, actually, were there mistakes which you would recognize on your own learning process? What is it over the last decade and a half in Wipro while you took over?
No, I just think, I'm very envious of people sitting in this room, right? Because I think your adaptability quotient, this is my view, sort of gets a bit more stiff as you get older, right? So your ability to adapt and to learn and to sort of change is much higher in your more formative years, in your early 20s. And so there's a huge opportunity to be learning, focusing on new opportunities and skills, whether they be soft, which I think are going to become more and more important, as are the content skills. And the reason I say that is because, especially in the technology industry, because how quickly technical skills are changing, there's no sustained competitive advantage in what you know, right? What you know today may be irrelevant 2 or 3 years from now. But if you have an ability to learn and to pick up the next thing, that's the kind of person you want to be hiring than somebody who may be very, very strong in something today, but may not have the potential to learn something for tomorrow. So, I go back to the point that Ronnie was making earlier, which is, focus on as much learning, both soft and hard, and continuously upgrading, because that's the only sustained differentiation in the long term, I believe.
You need to complement both. That's what you're saying. Soft skills along with the other skills you have.
But the mindset of being open to learning continuously.
And you think it's there or it's not there today? Is it there or not there today? What's your sense?
I think it's there. And I don't think it's there any less than people. We were talking about this, this motivation, and does it change with generations? I think it's there today. It was there before. It's not there any less today. And the access to do something about it is so much higher, because everything is at the access of a button, and so stuff can come to you as opposed to you having to go to stuff. So the ability to act on it, I think, is much higher today than perhaps it was 10 years ago, and that's a huge advantage.
Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck, it's probably one of the most important books in my mind about human capital, wrote the great book Mindset, right? So growth mindset are people who believe that capabilities are like muscles whom you can develop by working out, and a fixed mindset are people who believe that it's like shoe size or height. It is given. I mean, it's at that fundamental nature versus nurture sort of thing. But I think if anything you can predict is that the growth mindset is much more important than your technical competencies, right? And I think you can develop a growth mindset. It depends on the role models around you. It depends on many things. But I would say if you're doing a biopsy of a potential employee, rather than sort of test them for technical skills, and especially at senior levels, you would test for a growth mindset and a fixed mindset rather than anything else. This learning for earning versus learning for living contradiction, which educators have in their head, is actually completely ended. I was at a conference where I was talking about learning for earning, and this vice chancellor stood up and said, it's people like you who are screwing up education. Learning is not for living. Well, I can teach somebody to code in 6 months. I can teach somebody to be a barbender in 3 months. I can teach somebody to be a salesperson in 2 months. But I can't teach them to be curious, confident, risk taker, team player. And that is much more important for your wage premium in the long run and for your trajectory in the long run. So if we come back to that sort of notion that while we sort of tend to interview for sort of hard skills, but what actually matters in the long run is the soft skills. Soft skills are hard to measure. There can be an argument about what are soft skills, but that's really where the wage premium is moving.
I think that, two things perhaps that are enablers to also adaptability and learning. One is just physical and mental health, right? So I'll just share a personal example for me. One of the things that I got onto this bandwagon over the last 2 years, which is sleeping enough and exercising. And I really find that it's changed my life. I find I'm infinitely more productive, happy, positive.
How many hours?
Well, 7 in a minimum. I'm reading this book called The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington. It's the second time I'm reading it. I'm a huge, huge believer in sleep. So I think, they're strong enablers to then go out and drive something else. The other is a strong social network. And I don't mean your social, your sort of your friends' social network, but having sort of networks within which you can sort of bounce things off, connect, exchange ideas. I think they're very, very powerful.
Yeah, so I think just changing tracks, since you actually brought about health and whatever else, I just want to ask both of you all, just literally changing tracks in that. How important is sort of entrepreneurship today? Because I think the next wave of also employability we keep talking about is going to come from entrepreneurship and outside of some of the large sectors. But just, how important is entrepreneurship today in large organizations? And, what is the basis and trigger for that? That's one. And a completely different question, because I was just curious to understand, especially when we're talking about education today, is that given all the challenges that we have in India, I know a lot of people still feel we need to build, we lack and we won't be a global education hub or a global economy unless we have a Harvard, Princeton equivalent in India. But really, given everything else we've got in terms of challenges, is that real? Do we really need educational institutions at that level, or there are other solutions for India?
But the education question I'm going to take first, because I struggle a lot with that question, because 90,000 kids come to me every month for a job and I only hire 5,000. So John Gardner was an education secretary in the 1960s in the US, and he wrote a great book called Can We Be Equal and Excellent? And we've sort of, you know, because democracies want everybody to equal, you saw engineering capacity go from 4 lakhs to 15 lakhs in the last 15 years because everybody wanted to be an engineer, and there's nothing wrong with that. And a democracy will respond to that. But you need to be equal. Now the question is, do you control that by entry and exit gates? Like, so IITs and IIMs and Harvard have tight entry gates and wide open exit gates. The Chartered Accountant exam has wide open entry gates but tight exit gates. Vocational training has had wide open entry gates and wide open exit gates, which is why it hasn't really worked out. So I would submit that yes, I think we need IITs and we need ITIs. We need online. I don't think we can predict for India to be, why are countries poor? I think is the most interesting questions of all times, right? I mean, I landed for my MBA in August '94 in the US, and by September, in 1 month, I was asking myself, these Americans are smarter than us, why are they richer than us? I mean, clearly I can kick their butt individually, but that is, their productivity is embedded in their universities, in their institutions, it's in the air. Why does Joe Sixpack, who watches college football and drinks beer all day, make $50,000 a year, and why does Ram Bharose make 50,000 rupees a year? I think it's because they have got that balance of equal and excellent right. So I wouldn't say that we don't need a Harvard, but that doesn't imply that we don't need a massive expansion of our university and other systems. This is one place where we're just going to have to say that it's not either or. You have a large number of vocational universities who focus on employability, and you have a large number of but small student numbers of people, of research universities in our mind. I think the challenge is we still think of a university as a Harvard, while the notion of university has changed.
And the entrepreneurship?
Entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship? Well, I don't think India needs more entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's why I said entrepreneurship.
Yeah, so 50% of India is self-employed, most of that is self-exploitation. We don't need.
You think we've got enough entrepreneurs in this?
We've got enough self-employment.
Self-employed entrepreneurs.
See, there are two kinds of companies you can create.
But a key of an entrepreneur is to create massive jobs after them, not necessarily be self-employed. So the self-employed entrepreneurs may be the plague for India, is one way to look at that.
Yes, yes.
So when I say entrepreneurship, I'm meaning if you're an entrepreneur, if you haven't created at least 100 jobs, you're not an entrepreneur. If you're just self-employed and your family is, yes.
But how do you create more entrepreneurs?
Yeah, but my question was much more, how important today, while we're looking at skilling as one qualification, the other one is entrepreneurs, meaning people who are self-initiative, have the approach, the soft skills that will make them grow. And what is that quality you look for when you're looking at servicing, and as you said, being the waiter in the restaurant for every corporation, how important is the attitude approach that an entrepreneur brings to an organization versus just skills? And I think it's more an attitude approach question, because I think that's the soft skill maybe that we also lack.
Sure. I mean, I have to think of that, but I think it's more about organizations than individuals. I mean, big companies, even like us, do a good job of smothering people, right? I mean, the organization for most companies came from the military, right? That's where hierarchies sort of came from, and then we modified them for politics, and then we modified them for business. Yes, I think that intangibles are a much more larger part of GDP and company valuations than, I mean, I don't know, your fixed assets are probably 5% of your market cap. So 95% of Wipro's value is actually intangibles, right? It's true for me too. I mean, my fixed assets are close to less than 5% of market. So entrepreneurship, when you say, is the taking of initiative. Is that what you mean, right?
Yes, I think because we focus a lot on the fact of skills and all of that, but as we talked about the soft part is also the attitude. And if the attitude is high and the skill set is average, is that still an outstanding candidate for the 21st century?
I'll just share an analogy. You know, when I was graduating from college and I was looking at investment banking for the simple reason that most of my friends were looking at investment banking. And when the banks were coming to my university and I was studying in the US, they were actually looking to hire philosophy majors. And the reason they were looking to hire philosophy majors is because they didn't care so much about the content. They said, I can teach you the job, but I want to have people who can think, right? And so I think, having problem solving, self-starting, curiosity, analytical skills are very, very important. And I think, and you could argue that over time they may become more important, especially if you can teach someone something quite easily. So certainly having that, but having 150,000 people in an organization who are all looking to start themselves and all being too self-initiative may also create chaos. So you need to have the right balance between the two.
Yeah, and I think the objective here was just to throw open that outside of the normal skill sets that everyone keeps talking about of learning, there is the approach of attitude, which I think if it changes can take people to the next level.
My favorite quote is an American politician, Mario Cuomo. He says, we politicians campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. That's true for entrepreneurs, right? We write our business plans in poetry and execute them in prose. And the stereotype has traditionally been an entrepreneur who has attention deficit disorder, starts a company and sells it, and then hands it over to Disney, or like I did with my early company, review it. But I think that stereotype may have to end now. I think that train has left the station, because it's not poetry and prose. When I was younger, I used to think were sequential phases. Now they're actually how you can do it concurrently, right? Because too much poetry and no prose, you do nothing. Too much prose and no poetry, you do nothing great. I think that's really where we're struggling as companies and as individuals. You cannot say I'm a prose guy, because you will do nothing great. But if you say you're a poetry guy, you will do nothing. And I think both at a portfolio, and I think that's a problem with us as a country if we want to talk about our execution abilities, right? Because we'd get the poetry right, but we don't get the prose right? That's because of, permanent generalist civil servants who don't specialize in anything, right? And so you're getting prose right, but you're not getting poetry. So I would submit that the sort of question is that as an individual, how do you balance poetry and prose? As an organization, how do you balance poetry and prose? And as a country, how do we balance poetry and prose? I don't think one is superior than the other. When I was younger and just started out as an entrepreneur, I used to think, I used to be more arrogant, and but getting the skill sets for getting the train out of the station may be different from keeping the trains running on time, but one is not superior than the other. And the truly interesting people are those who can do both.
Your mic, yeah.
They need to be not only job seekers but also entrepreneurs. Would you agree with that? The next, the young people who come into the force, they need to look like, view it like that? What Nandan mentioned recently.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that.
What he said was that you need to be both a job seeker and an entrepreneur also. Or you should perceive it like that in the coming years, actually.
I'm not sure of the full context of that, but we just discussed that point. I tend to agree with Manish, which is, we have enough self-employed entrepreneurs at least, and certainly if we are driving entrepreneurship which can lead to employment, then that's a good thing. But I think to me they're distinct things. Somebody who's looking to start something on their own.
Yeah.
As
you said, as you have 150,000 people employed company, you can't have all of that, because then you'll have the wild, wild west in that. Yeah.
Correct. But I will add, to that point of, just sharing as a statistic, I think the IT industry, I won't even speak for the company, the IT industry today arguably is hiring more non-technical people than they ever have in mainstream jobs, right? And so it just goes to show you how the nature of the job is also changing from just being pure technical to involving many, many more components in delivering an output to a customer. Right? It doesn't necessarily mean it's a big number, but that's happening.
But what about your notion of I mean, I'm always sort of hesitant to disagree with Nandan, but in this case, I think I don't think that's what he probably meant. Because, forget about self-employment. I don't think India needs that many enterprises. India has 63 million enterprises. 12 million of them don't have an office. 12 million work from home. Only 8.5 million pay GST. Only 1.1 million pay Provident Fund. There are only 18,000 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than 10 crores. So this, I mean, the US economy is 8 times our size and it only has 22 million enterprises. So it's not clear we need a lot more entrepreneurship because a lot of entrepreneurship is not viable and not everybody can be an entrepreneur. And just having more enterprises is not really going to make India less poor. We need more productive enterprises, right? See, as an entrepreneur, there are two kinds of companies you can build, a baby and a dwarf. A baby and a dwarf are both small, but the baby is going to grow and the dwarf is going to stay there. The difference between a baby and a dwarf is not more food. It is really skills. It is poetry and prose being balanced. It is recognizing that a 10-year plan is not 10 one-year plans. It is ambition, it is curiosity. So the soft stuff which we're really having trouble also on this panel sort of agreeing what are soft skills and how you measure what soft skills are. But I think that India doesn't need more self-employment and we don't need many more enterprises. We need productivity. You know, it's not more cooks in the kitchen. It's a different recipe.
So maybe, Mank, if you can help us out, we've got a few audience questions. Is that something we can sort of run up from here? And I think there's some specifically addressed to both Rishad and Manish. And then we can throw it open for 2 or 3 more questions from the audience. Some of you have already sent it, but you know, we want to start with 1 or 2. Maybe we'll do 1, 2 from there. And if you can raise your hands, then somebody can give you a mic there while we're getting ready. So we don't do, if the mics can be just given to the 2 people who raised their hands while we're doing that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the first question is addressed to Rishad. Yeah, I'll read it out for you. So the question states, the recent trends where employees are shifting job rapidly because they feel stagnated after a while and they want to learn new concepts as they go along. So how does that impact you as an employer from the other side of the table?
No, so I think, you know, they may not doing a good job, right, as employers, because our objective is how do we create the platform for people both to be able to upgrade skills as well as to be able to move into different opportunities and newer jobs. So today I don't see that as a major challenge for us, both in terms of being able to provide the platform to upgrade as well as moving into new jobs. But that's a concern. If people don't feel that is happening, then losing good people is a concern.
Got it. Got it.
Should we go with one question from the audience in the meantime? Somebody, you've got a mic? Yeah, there's a mic. Just go for it.
Hello, check. This question is to Mr. Rishad. Sir, yeah, my name is Roshan. Sir, let me just give you a scenario wherein I'm a BCom grad. I have finished my commerce and I'm interested in UI UX design, user interface and user experience design of a company's website. Let me just assume that I'm finishing a course in UI UX design with upGrad. I'm going to interview with Flipkart or Amazon or something. The HR would probably ask me like, you have undergone an identity crisis. You're a commerce grad and now your specialization is UI UX design. Why should I hire you? How do we deal with such kind of backward thinking in India?
It's a very, no, it really is. It's a good question and a very legitimate concern. And look, at some level, there's this catch-22 till organizations also get more progressive about how are they able to re-architect, re-engineer, reimagine their HR processes to be able to attract people that come from unconventional backgrounds, right? As opposed to the traditional people who follow the very cookie-cutter approach. There is a little sort of space in between where it is going to be bumpy. But I will tell you certainly that the mindset journey to move in that direction, to be able to challenge the status quo and to be able to look at someone who's a BCom graduate, who's done a course on UI UX, who now wants to get into the design space within a company, could they be given an opportunity? I would submit that thinking has started. Is it mature? And will you certainly run into HR people who say you run into an identity crisis? Perhaps. But perhaps you'll also more and more run into HR people who will say, that's terrific, and let me understand, you know, what your capabilities are. I'll tell you one of my pet peeves, you know, because I'm relatively younger. When somebody introduces themselves to me and says, you know, I'm so-and-so, and I have 20 years of experience, I'm saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. What does that mean that you have 20 years of experience, you know? So should I be hiring you for a UI UX job because you have 20 years of experience? Or should I be hiring that person who has 1 or 2 years or has has done something in it for a couple of years. And more that mindset is shifting. I can certainly submit for inside our company where we're thinking about that more and more, that look, you don't necessarily want someone who's spent more time in the company or in technology, but you want someone who has the relevant capabilities, and you don't care, you care much less today if that person is 22 with the right skills, with limited experience, but with some skills in that area, than somebody who's had 20 years of experience in unrelated skills and no experience in that particular area. So it is a bumpy ride. It is not shifting as fast as it could perhaps, but I would submit that it is shifting. So don't be disillusioned by that, because I think more and more you will see that shift happening. And organizations that don't shift fast enough, I think they will get left behind.
I think the CEOs have to take the cues to really figure out how they can work with their HR departments, because I think this is a genuine gripe for a lot of people, and I'm sure, you know, given the fact that, as he said, the backward HR approach to things, I'm sure
I'm not sure it's backward. That's not fair. It's up to you to prove. You know, signaling value is in your hands, and that's why one of the things that we're obsessed about in the National Skill Mission is apprenticeships, right? India only has 3 lakh apprentices, Germany has 3 million, Japan has 10 million, China has 20 million apprentices. So so apprenticeships, projects, there are different ways to think about signaling value for career changers. There are different ways to think about signaling value for your resume, especially in a world of social media, especially in an online world, especially in a world of projects. So, you know, yes, we can sort of say that HR people are backward, and, you know, maybe they are. I'm not sure all of them are. But I think that signaling value of your resume can be, of your skills, of your ambition, of your curiosity, can be signaled in different ways. And if you are a career changer, I think the onus will be on you to prove that you're worthy of what you aspire to.
And therefore, you're saying the articulation at that interview for someone
absolutely
has to be sharper and better and forceful.
Creating a portfolio of skills, creating an online portfolio of your UI, UX, an online resume, a video resume, a referenceability of people whom you've done small projects for. I mean, there are various tools to create signaling value, and in today's world, I see kids being very creative on how they signal their capabilities in ways that cannot be signaled in a one-page resume.
Okay, we'll go to one more question here. Somebody's got a mic? Yeah, can the gentleman there on the blue shirt get a mic? And if somebody can raise their hand, is there a second mic we can just arm it on? Please go ahead.
Good evening, sir. So my question is for all. We are talking about soft skills and entrepreneur. So I wanted to know, as being an entrepreneur, what is the soft skills he needs? Because we can't do everything. You can't be a technician, you can't be the delivery boy. So what is the main soft skill that we need to start a company? As an entrepreneur, I want to ask this question.
Ronnie.
Manish, no, I think core strengths and what is your core competence, and I think the question is, the good part is that you mentioned we, so I'm assuming you've got co-founders, and I think that would be a good starting point, because I think it depends on where and what you're looking at, in terms of whether you're looking at a service organization, whether you're looking at a technology organization, but it is true, even as an entrepreneur, you don't need to be an expert in everything else. You need to figure out what are your core strengths, and then you need to either hire or get co-founders in those elements.
So as the sir said, that soft skills, we need to improve our soft skills. As we know, the soft skills is a very broad term. So my only question is for myself, what is skills need? Because today so much is going on, digital marketing, and many things are going on in the world. As we know,
crux of an entrepreneur is that you're in solution mode. You know, you're at best a problem solver, and you're in solution mode. And a lot of that, therefore, depends on your attitude. Because if your attitude and your self-confidence and your ability to be able to solve problems and preempt problems before you can solve them happens, your ability to be successful and stay the course is going to be that much more. So if you ask me personally what are the soft skills, I would say attitude, problem solving, and curiosity would be top of my mind when I'm looking at soft skills.
Thank you, sir.
In a holistic sense. I don't know if anyone...
I'm still a baby and
my name is Santosh, and my first question is to Rishad. Are we teaching ourselves, are we learning ourselves to teach computer in this era of AR, augmented reality, or you can say ER? So are we teaching are we learning ourselves to teach computer to do our job, or are we competing ourselves with the computer? This is for Rishad. And then my second question is to Mr. Manish, you mentioned that India doesn't need any entrepreneurs in the coming years, right? So Silicon Valley is one of the reasons for being, for the America to be on the top of the, universe. So still, India, in a contest, we are still growing, and I think we need a solution makers in the current contest. That's what I feel. So what is your thought, in going forward?
So I don't see personally technology as a replacement fundamentally to human beings. I see it as an enablement to human beings, right? And I'm a stronger believer, if you think about automation and AI, in assisted AI, right? So how can you leverage the technology to do a better job and better outcomes and better predictability, right? So for example, in one area in healthcare, where can you have AI assist doctors? I'm not so sure how many of us in the room here would want to have our, some scan or X-ray read by just a machine and rely on that machine. We may certainly want that input also as a second opinion or a third opinion, but we wouldn't want that to be replacing. So I still look at technology very much as an enabler to drive solutions, leveraging and working with people as opposed to replacing people altogether. I mean, there'll certainly be some jobs where, which are at the bottom of the pyramid in level 1 and level 2, which are robotic, which are highly sort of standardized, where machines can do a much better job, much faster job, et cetera, et cetera. But that can perhaps create new jobs, and certainly as you move up the value chain, I see a strong association of technology working closely with people.
I don't mean we don't, there is a distinction in all entrepreneurship literature between good entrepreneurship and bad entrepreneurship. I think that self-exploitation is what most Indians are doing in the labor force. And there was an idiot Russian economist who convinced Nehru in the 1920s that small farms are viable because you don't have to pay yourself a salary, your wife a salary, and your kid a salary, right? That's true for most kirana stores in India. So that is not good entrepreneurship. That is bad entrepreneurship, because if these people put their labor in the market and put their assets on the market, they probably would make more. So I think India needs good entrepreneurship. And I think India needs ethical entrepreneurship, right? I mean, one of the steel companies which were putting in bankruptcy over the last few months has more loans than India's central government allocation to primary education. I don't think that was good entrepreneurship, right? So I think we need good entrepreneurship, and nobody's disputing it. But good entrepreneurship is really hard, and not everybody has to be an entrepreneur. I think that's a very high standard to put on people. I mean, entrepreneurship is really hard, and you can't really build great companies only by entrepreneurs. It's very important. So entrepreneurship is romantic, entrepreneurship is wonderful, but don't put the burden on everybody to be an entrepreneur. That's all I'm saying. And if you do, then make sure that it's good entrepreneurship rather than bad entrepreneurship. That was my simple point.
Is there somebody else with a microphone? Okay, go ahead, sir. And then the lady on the third row. Lady in the third row after that.
My question is to you, Mr. Ronnie.
Go ahead.
The question is, in the context of Indian values and culture, what is the future of learning as per the subject goes like that?
Future of?
Future of learning in context of Indian culture and value system. What is the role in developing soft skill in context of Indian culture and value system to incorporate that, like that of Japan, like that of Germany, like that of UK, like that of USA? They have got different cultural value system. So we cannot say that we could be adapting their way of dealing with the employees.
No, I think I get the question, and if I were to volunteer that, I'll maybe answer it in two parts. One, I think it's a little bit more of a philosophical question. I think for a lot of people, we're talking about a very urban niche, but when you're looking at skilling and upskilling, and when you're looking at the rural sector, and we work very closely there also, I think one of the big challenges we find there is actually aspiration levels. And the soft skills that everyone needs is the reason why I think we're spending too much money on skilling, and the employability is actually going for a toss, because in 6 months, they're either running back or they're getting out of their jobs in many aspects. And we are teaching them hospitality. We're not just teaching them only plumbing and electrician when you're looking at that segment. So I think the soft skill approach for India, especially because our university and college background haven't taught us that element of being in the real world and that element of competitiveness, is very, very important. I think we also lead substantially sheltered lives. So if you talk about Germany and Japan and many others, the cultural is that when you're growing up, you lead a much more sheltered life, and therefore your ability to be out there and that shock element is very, very, very stern. Therefore, I think, again, and I think we were talking about the entrepreneurship qualities, but I think, therefore, attitude, approach, self-confidence, your ability to get out there, manage an interview, it's not just a simple task. So I think in each and every one, today, I personally believe soft skills is almost 51%, and I think some of the skilling elements is 49%. So we'll have to obviously learn some of the technologies when we come to that, but that's the top of the pyramid. But if we really want to start skilling that, and I think, you know, Manish may want to add to that because you're part of a much larger framework.
I think so. We don't have to be Western to be modern, but I think an electrician is pretty much the same in New York as it is in Bombay. So, I mean, you know, at a certain level, India's problem at the bottom of the pyramid has really nothing to do with culture. You know, cultural explanations are, at best, the soft bigotry of low expectations, and at worst, they are racism. From my vantage
So
point.
maybe
I have no patience for software. You know, Odias are not lazy, Bengalis are not this. So I hear this a lot, you know, and we have employees now in 5,000 cities. I would be careful with cultural explanations for India's poverty, for India's wages, or for India's jobs. I think we have a plumbing problem. It's more in the realm of prose rather than poetry. It's a plumbing problem. If we fix that plumbing, India's skill or education problem isn't a problem like cancer or climate change. It is a plumbing problem. It is fixable in 5 or 10 years.
So if I were to pose it slightly differently, that a plumber in New York, since you brought his example, the plumber in Mumbai, I think the plumber in New York would be self-employed. He'd be able to do the sales job. He'd have a lot more approach to get the next client and be much more self-serving. And the probability of a plumber here, he'd need a catalyst. He'd be part of a department that may actually get that going. Do you have a different view on that?
Well, we spend $12,000 a year on a plumber in New York. And the government writes a check for 99%. Even in Singapore, ITE, which is a fantastic system, and all of us people hear about Singapore's vocational system, ITE spends $13,000 a year on a plumber. The government writes a check for 99%. I mean, we would love that. I mean, we would produce plumbers of the same quality. We spend $10,000 a year on an IT engineer. So I think cost, quality, and scale. You know, I went to Wharton, I paid 18,000 rupees an hour. ISB is about 12,000 rupees an hour. IMs are about 8,000 rupees an hour. IMs are 8,000. IIT is about 4,000 rupees an hour. ITIs are 200 rupees an hour. So cost, quality, and scale are a trinity, and they're a difficult trinity. So you have to be careful.
Okay, last 2 questions. Yeah, so the lady there, you got the mic. Go ahead, ma'am.
So we've been hearing a lot about economy. And
Can you talk a little bit into the mic?
yeah, is it better now?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So we've been hearing a lot about the gig economy, and about 15 million are going to be freelancers by 2020 is what we hear. So what is the quality that you perceive of freelancers who's really looking into their careers in learning, as well as what is the appetite of companies to take on freelancers?
Appetite and quality of freelancers.
No, it's a great question, and I think it is going to your point. It's going to become more and more real, and I think organizations will have to find a way to participate with them. So, for example, one of the things we do and we work very closely with is a whole bunch of expert networks that are out there. You know, there's a group, for example, called the Gershon Lehman Group, which is about 15,000 people who are experts in many, many different areas who don't want to be working full-time and want to be working exactly when they want to work. But they're great capabilities, so how do you leverage them? So, my submission would be that in the gig economy, at least the way we look at it, you'd be working with people who are already experts in a particular field than people who are trying to move up the value chain and drive learning and upskilling, et cetera, et cetera. The other is the whole crowdsourcing platform and just fundamentally changing the ways of working. And I strongly believe that the model, even to deliver a lot of work that we do for customers today or the IT industry does for customers today, will change and move to a great extent to some form of crowdsourcing, whether it be through private crowds that sit within the organization or expert groups that sit outside, or then the broader crowd that is out there. You know, we do a lot of work with crowds. We run hackathons internally. So working in some sort of part-time, when you on-demand manner that people want to drive, I think will become a core part of the way you deliver work to customers. It's not a big piece today, but I think over the next 5 years, it will become a much bigger piece.
Yeah, one last question, go ahead.
My question is with Mr. Manish. Sir, suppose you have 2 profiles. Okay. One is like expert in Java, and another one is like have average knowledge in Java, C, and maybe in .NET. Okay, so which one you will prefer and why?
Is that for Rishad or for me? I mean, I have no idea. Ask Rishad.
No, actually, you are from the recruitment background, so I just asked with you.
No, let Rishad answer your question.
Or maybe anyone who could be fine.
It's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, it's very difficult.
We're talking about the upgrade and in organization, and we have that kind of system that everyone can go and access something.
No, but depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for a Java developer and somebody's an expert Java developer, then you would take the Java developer, right? If you were looking for something that can then build into something different and the other competencies that that person has can grow. So it's a very contextual question. I mean, if you're looking, so I'm struggling to give you an answer as to which one.
Just to add in that, I'm sorry, like a guy who has like expertise in Java, he's not willing to learn the new skills now. Okay, but a guy who has like average knowledge in C, C#, and .NET and Java, he's willing to learn and adapt the things quickly.
How do you judge willingness to learn?
Yeah, I just want to know from your side, sir. If I would have been that, then I didn't ask that question. So how you will judge and how you will go with the one guy, that this is perfect for myself or for our organization.
Willingness to learn?
No, I mean, I agree. You know, certainly if one knew with certainty that this person has a much more stronger propensity to upgrade and willing to move up and be much more sort of open to new ideas and can be of much more value over time, then certainly, you know, the logical answer would be to pick that person. But that's the thing that's, to Manish's point, very, very difficult to measure for, especially in the nature of interaction or the nature of interviews that happen today. So you would likely go with the expert Java developer if that's what you need today, even though, you know, you may think that he or she may be less disposed to learn. It's difficult to measure with accuracy how that will actually pan out. So it's a bit of an academic question and a bit of an academic answer to an academic question.
Well, the only way you can find employees you want is you have to kiss many frogs to find your princess. Let's just agree on that. You cannot, interviews are quite an imperfect proxy for deciding. Resumes are hiring the right person for the right job is a very difficult thing. It's an imperfect science, and it's very different at the bottom of the pyramid and when you get senior. At seniors, for hiring a CEO is one of the most difficult things in the world. And that biopsy of how do you judge ambition, how do you judge persistence, how do you judge curiosity, which may actually the only things that matter for a CEO anyway. Those are very hard to measure. So,
okay, the mic finally went out, so we're just going to have one very last question.
So to most people starting out today, the resources they have to learn is really overwhelming. How do you help them choose what resources to start learning from? Like with online learning and stuff, there's so much.
And so what's the question exactly?
How do you help people choose their resources better to learn?
Abundance of stuff being thrown at you. How do you filter out to what is relevant to actually then find what can help you? Because sometimes it's overwhelming to actually make that choice, correct?
Exactly.
Which I agree with, by the way.
That there is no...
There's such an overabundance of information being thrown at you. How do you filter out relevance? Is a skill in itself.
And where does aptitude then come in? Because I think aptitude and inclination maybe is the first starting point for that.
Ambition. I mean, it is where where do you want to go?
You want
to start, right? I mean, you don't go from today to tomorrow. You come back from tomorrow to today. The most interesting people, a 10-year plan is not 10 one-year plans, right? So the question of saying where should I focus on or what should I do depends on what you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah.
No, even if I'm...
Yeah. So, I mean, Rishad empathizes with you.
So I want to see what Ronnie says, because I think it's a very valid, you know, I struggle with the same thing in a different context, but I think the question he's asking is, look, if I want to upgrade something very specifically, and I want to do this, and I know what I want to do, which is to get from X to Y, but I have 50 choices of how I can get from X to Y.
But is the assumption you know what you want to do?
Yeah, even if
so that's a given, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, then it's a different answer.
Select between those options.
Okay, so maybe first I'll give you a slightly more broader answer. It's like if I want to be an entrepreneur, and I'm not going to sit there and say, but I've got these 40 different industries and 60 different opportunities thrown at me. How do I become an entrepreneur? And then I become comatose. It doesn't work that way, right? If you want to choose, it's your career path that you want to necessarily choose. So the fact that you've got a plethora of options could be an opportunity and not something of an area of confusion. The only way you're going to dilute that down is first your ambition or your clarity or your aspiration of where you want to go. And then I think the second would be the core competence. Maybe you want to go in, take 2 or 3 to see your comfort on them. What's been your background? How is going to be your adaptability to that? But I think over a period of time, if you've got a lot thrown at you, you'll have to simplify that. In fact, that'll be one of your easier solutions problems that you're going to have to find solutions to as you go forward in life, is not the choice of plenty, but narrowing it down. If you can't cross that bridge, that's going to be difficult. So I think it is about really figuring out what are you best suited for. And if that means you have to go in and out to experience 1 or 2 opportunities, maybe that's the way you want to go. If you've got clarity on your role, it's more about, I'm assuming you're going to use that as a means to a career end. And therefore, if you can define your career end and look at that as a means, it will give you at least one better filter than maybe what you're asking for right now.
I mean, I would submit it's, it's sort of, I love reading. I've read a book a week for 15 years. And for me, which book to read, because I only have 52 in a year, is a complex algorithm of people I trust, newspapers I trust, book reviews I trust. Everybody has a different way of deciding what to do. I think you can crowdsource this. I think there is a wisdom in crowds. I think at some points you'll sort of walk away from the warmth at the center of the herd and say, no, I am so passionately interested in this inch-wide, mile-deep subject that I'm going to choose this right now. But I would submit that if you're at that stage of saying that I know the direction of travel, are you traveling north, or are you going to Delhi, Jaipur, or are you going to Chandni Chowk or Shahjahan Road? Once you figure that one out, it becomes easier. But I would submit if you know where you want to go, and that was why I reacted the first time, if you know where you wanted to go, you will have to come up with your own algorithm, and that will be a soft skill in itself, right?
Yeah, and once you've decided that road, if you've got 4 different organizations, suppliers, or whatever else in the choice in that, that's a different level of gradation versus I've been thrown with multiple career options, and that's where I would want to go. I think that filter only you can do. I don't think you're going to get advice from anybody on that. Any other closing question from you before?
Well, I was just wondering, I think Bill Gates had said earlier that if you were to start out again, there would be 3 areas which you would look at, which is, I think he was talking about biosciences actually, then he spoke about solar energy. And for both of you, what would be those 3 areas if you were to start out in India?
See, you're the younger one, so you said age is on your advantage, Rishad, so this is something,
No, I mean, I would think, look, I think there's a huge opportunity in the whole cognitive space around automation. I think that's certainly an area that is worth, so the whole AI cognitive space is an area certainly worth getting into and exploring deeper. I think there's, I'm not an expert on this, but I think there's so much that can be done with technology to just fundamentally transform healthcare. And so I think there's a huge opportunity both to make money, but also to address a need that is very deep and pervasive in the country. So I would pick those 2 things, I would say.
What about you, Manish?
I'd say Bill Gates picked all 3 choices wrong. He should move to India.
Oh, really?
The next 20 years, what is happening in India is, it's not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. It's a unique time to be an entrepreneur. It's a unique time to be young. So he should probably move here.
That's a pretty high point to end the session with. And I don't know whether you planned that as your last line or the punchline on that, but it definitely is. So thank you very much on behalf of the Indian Express and UpGrad. I want to thank Rishad and Manish for coming out here and spending time with us and giving us their insight. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for participating.
We just wanted to say a big thanks to all of you. Thank you for a fantastic conversation on stage. Thank you to all of you for some fabulous questions. We hope you've all we've contributed to some of your learnings, inspired you. We hope you're going back with some nuggets to reflect on. Thank you for being a wonderful audience and spending your Saturday with us. Thank you so much.